all of this, cerebrum. All of this, cerebellum. All of this, brain stem. All of this, right here, diencephalon. Cerebrum easy, biggest chunks. Has a cortex where the mind lives. Cerebellum coordinates skeletal muscle. Cerebrum, contralateral. Right side controls left side of the body. Left cerebrum controls right side of the body. Contralateral. Cerebellum, ipsilateral. Left side controls left side of muscles. Right side does right side of muscles. Okay, this is corpus callosum.
Corpus callosum.
Commissural fibers. It talks from this side to this side. So if this cell wants to talk to that cell, the other side, it has to send a neuron down, crosses over in the corpus callosum, and goes back up to that cell. So any communication between this side and this side is going through corpus callosum, commissural fibers. You've seen, got time? You've seen TV shows where a guy's walking around in the ER with an arrow or a knife or something stuck in his head, and he's like, will somebody please pull this out? It's because it went right in there and didn't interfere with anything. Make sense? Now when they pull it out, there's some blood vessels in there and he's going to bleed, so they have to do it controlled. But that's why, because these are two separate hemispheres.
I saw that.
Diencephalon is the middle part right here. It surrounds the third ventricle. Third ventricle is a hollow space. It's filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The diencephalon is three paired structures: the hypothalamus, the thalamus, and the epithalamus. It's like a jelly donut. If we take a jelly donut and turn it up on its side,
You'll be famous now.
the jelly is the whole, the ventricle. In our brain, it has cerebrospinal fluid. In the donut, it has jelly. But it fills the space. So if we take our donut and we set it down like that, the dough that's on the bottom, hypothalamus. The dough that's on the sides, thalamus. The dough that's on the top, epithalamus. That makes up the diencephalon. Make sense? Now, you know we said we talked about all of this. All of this was our cerebral cortex, the outside part where the mind lives. So all this sensory input is coming up through this cord, and it all passes through thalamus. All of it, because thalamus tells us if we like that sensation or not. And all of our thalami, each of our thalamus likes different things. Okay? You like red, you like blue, you like green, because thalamus. So thalamus tells us if we like that sensation or if we don't. So all sensory is going to go through thalamus before it goes on out to the cortex. Diencephalon, pretty important to do. Hypothalamus controls our homeostasis. Anything to do with homeostasis, y'all remember that term?
Yes.
Anything to do with homeostasis is going to be controlled right there. The brain stem is all of this. The brain stem is made up of the midbrain, and the midbrain looks like a crow. You see the crow? See him sitting on his wire? See the crow? There's his tail feathers. Here's his beak. So the crow, and the crow has a backpack. The backpack is the corpora quadrigemina. The crow and his backpack make up the midbrain. This is the pons, this round chunk, and this is medulla oblongata. Make sense? So this spinal cord's hanging down here, and so all of the sensory inputs coming up, all of the motor output is going down. So the cord becomes a two-way pathway. So cerebrum, cerebellum, corpus callosum, there are two big hollow spaces, one in each cerebral cortex, called the lateral ventricles, and they touch, they come together. So this hollow space and that hollow space come together and meet. So this we call the lateral ventricle. This hollow space we call the third ventricle. And this one is the fourth ventricle. And all of them are filled with cerebrospinal fluid, just like our jelly donut is filled with jelly. Make sense? Okay, now, pituitary, and pituitary is attached to hypothalamus. And he's hanging from the hypothalamus with a little string called the infundibulum. This guy, pituitary, y'all remember in bones, remember sella turcica, the Turk's saddle in the sphenoid bone? Right in the middle? This guy sits down in that saddle. That's what it's there for, because pituitary sits in the saddle. He's held to the hypothalamus by this little string. The pituitary is an endocrine gland. It secretes a lot of hormones. This guy is little string, the infundibulum, is made up of a bunch of axons. Remember axons? Mm-hmm. The cell body of those axons is up here in the hypothalamus. So the string is part of hypothalamus. The pituitary is part of endocrine gland. What's really cool, in AP2, the pituitary has an anterior and a posterior lobe. The anterior lobe makes about 50 of its own hormones. The posterior lobe gets its hormones ready-made from the hypothalamus. And y'all remember in neuromuscular junction in muscles this term, we exocytized some acetylcholine out into the synaptic cleft. Mm-hmm. Well, those hormones are manufactured up here. They run down the axons and are exocytized out into the posterior lobe, and the posterior lobe just holds them until it gets a signal to release it. So the posterior lobe is called the neurohypophysis, and the anterior lobe is called the adenohypophysis. The anterior lobe makes its own. And a lot of the hormones that come from hypothalamus tells the pituitary what to do. It tells it to release different hormones. So the hypothalamus is in charge of the endocrine system.
So the hypothalamus is kind of like the wife.
The fleet commander.
Hey, you know we said the thalamus right here tells us what we like. Hypothalamus tells us if we're hungry, if we're thirsty, if we want to have sex, controls all those things. How many times have you ever been to the refrigerator and said, I'm hungry? And you open the door and you're like, nothing in there, I won't. That's because this part's saying, dude, feed me. And this part's saying, I don't like that. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's the way it works. That's the way it works. And it works like that in everything homeostatic. It tells us, it gives us our sex drive. The hypothalamus gives us sex drive. And so it says, I really, 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 really want to get laid. But I don't want to do it with her. I want to do it with her. You know what I'm saying? And so we get what we like and what we need. Make sense? Hypothalamus controls all homeostasis. Thalamus tells us if we like it or not.
Okay.
Make sense?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Okay. Well,
Thank you very much.
well.